All right, today we're discussing the corrupt Department of Justice and the criminal Anthony Fauci and Rand Paul's solutions to these problems. First, let's hear this tragic story of this college professor who stood up for what's right and was still kicked out, unfortunately.
He was fired from his job as a Harvard professor. He writes that Harvard tramples the truth, adding that Veritas wasn't the university's guiding principles. I know it's one of your guiding principles. Americans are still looking for answers, right, including monies received by Big Pharma. Where do we stand? Will we ever get all of the answers of what happened?
Well, Martin Kulldorff was a hero and is a hero and someone who spoke the truth to power. And for that, Harvard, which used to believe in the truth, got rid of him. It just shows you how low Harvard has sunk, and it's so disappointing. But he really was one of the truth tellers on this. One of the things I've gotten passed in the last week out of committee, and we're hoping to pass it and make it a law, is that all of the scientists that work for government should have to reveal their royalties that they get. So we're not even clear.
What a great idea. People have been saying for a long time politicians should have to act like NASCAR drivers and have all their sponsors on their jackets. Sounds like a good idea to me.
Or whether or not people approving the vaccines and approving mandates on vaccines, whether or not they receive money in the form of royalties. Anthony Fauci told me it was none of my business and none of the taxpayers' business, and he didn't have to reveal his royalties. Right. They should all have.
Because Fauci says he is the science. What a ridiculous guy.
To reveal their royalties. If you have a conflict of interest, you shouldn't be voting on approving vaccines or mandates if you own part of the stock, or if you're making money from the stock, or if you're being paid royalties.
So here's the Harvard medical professor who was standing up against the COVID mandates and got fired as a result. He didn't follow the science, right? And Fauci says he is the science, so we're supposed to listen to him. Unfortunately, though, there's way too many woke administrators in the Ivy League schools who push for ridiculous solutions to problems. They just have too many. In the Ivy League schools, I think Yale is actually the worst. I read that it's 1-to-1 now in the ratio of administrators to students. But the rest of the Ivy League schools are that bad as well. And these worthless administrators have nothing to do besides push political narratives, besides in trying to indoctrinate their students, which is why they're so anti-Semitic in some of these Ivy League schools. It's disgusting. So it says here, you worked for Harvard as a professor of medicine since 2003. Recently announced he was fired for clinging to the truth in his public opposition to COVID lockdowns and vaccine mandates. Kulldorff, an epidemiologist and biostatistician, told National Review he was fired by Harvard-affiliated Mass General Brigham Hospital System and put on leave of absence by Harvard Medical School in November 2021 over his stance on COVID. Nearly 2 years later, in October 2023, his leave of absence was terminated as a matter of policy, marking the end of his time at the university. Harvard severed ties with Kulldorff, all on their initiative, he said. A Harvard spokesperson told National Review that university policy requires hospital-based faculty like Kulldorff to maintain an active appointment with an affiliated hospital in order to retain their position at Harvard Medical School. Yeah, well, that was a setup. Obviously, they canceled him at both places at the same time. And they're not showing any apology for it. They just don't care, right? So many people were fired over the COVID mandates. This guy is far from the only one. I've seen dozens of people get fired at this place or that place. So it's pretty unfortunate. So censorship and rejection led Kulldorff to co-author the Great Barrington Declaration in October 2020. Alongside a number of other professors, together, the three public health scientists argued for limited and targeted COVID-19 restrictions that protect the elderly while letting children and young adults live close to normal lives. Yeah, we should have been able to go to school and work. There should have only been, 14 days of lockdowns at most, and then we go back to our regular lives. But unfortunately, this guy suffered as a result of authoritarian policies and lost his job. He says, the beauty of our immune system is that those who recover from an infection are protected if and when they are re-exposed. He wrote in the City Essay, Since mid-2021, we have known, as one would expect, that COVID-acquired immunity is superior to vaccine-acquired immunity. Remember when you get canceled on social media for saying those obvious truths? Now you can just write it wherever you want. Nobody cares. But you'd get canceled for a long time for pointing out that that was good. And I just watched a video that I'll comment on soon, which is about how getting the vaccine after you've already gotten COVID and recovered from it is actually worse for you. Based on that, I argue that hospitals should hire, not fire, nurses and other hospital staff with COVID-acquired immunity, since they have stronger immunity than the vaccinated. What a concept. All right. One of the biggest issues in the country today is the connection between government, medical institutions, and large universities and Ivy League schools. So Rand Paul is going out of his way to try to address some of these issues. He's creating a bill that would require the NIH scientists to disclose royalties they receive from drug companies. Would this solve all the problems at the Ivy League schools? No, it's not really based on that, but it would help a lot of the issues concerning the medical field and corruption in government. So it says the Royalty Transparency Act passed unanimously out of the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee yesterday. Over the past decade, scientists working at the National Institutes of Health have earned an estimated $400 million in royalties from third-party companies for medical treatments and innovation they've helped produce. The NIH often provides grants to these same companies and produces research on their products. Despite that, the agency has resisted disclosing how much its scientists are getting paid and by whom. Obviously, this stuff is leading to corruption in the medical field and in government, and things are being pushed that people don't really want, that aren't that beneficial, as we talked about just a second ago. A bill moving its way through Congress would change that. On Wednesday, the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee passed the Royalty Transparency Act of 2024 by a 12-0 vote. That's pretty awesome. Unanimous. The legislation would require that royalties received by federal government employees be included in the financial disclosures, and that disclosures be made available online for the general public to view. Nice. This is just basic 101 of conflict of interest. We're letting the billions of dollars that change hands over at NIH and between NIH and Big Pharma, which had a lot of influence in the COVID pseudo-pandemic, to be completely unscrutinized, says Senator Rand Paul, the author of the legislation. This is probably the first reform bill that actually has a chance to correct some of the things that are rotten in the system. Let's remember that this issue has been a problem for a very long while, and also that Anthony Fauci made millions of dollars during the COVID pandemic. Okay, so there's a bit of corruption, which is why he gets so angry when these issues are discussed. It says here, a 2005 investigation by the Associated Press revealed that NIH scientists were receiving royalties for companies' pharmaceutical treatments that the agency was also studying in clinical trials. Oh boy, corruption. Wow. So they're approving drugs because they're getting paid to approve those drugs. You think that has something to do with why, when we watch television, the drug commercials have so many side effects mentioned? Half the commercial is just side effects. That investigation prompted the NIH to require its employees to disclose these royalty payments to patients in clinical trials. But that information was still kept from the general public. In 2021, Watchdog Group opened the books, filed public records requests, and when those were ignored, a lawsuit seeking more information on royalties paid to NIH employees. Initially, the NIH only released heavily redacted documents showing which employees had received royalties, but not how much they had paid. We probably get more open source documents when the government's talking about aliens these days than they do about medical corruption. Who they were being paid by or what they were being paid for. In 2023, the NIH at last released new documents showing which companies were paying royalties to NIH scientists and more information on what the royalties were for, but the agency continues to redact how much individual scientists are earning from these royalties. It doesn't matter if it's $1 or $1,000,000. That's still corruption, isn't it? To be paid these royalties while you're working on a drug and whether it should be approved or not. Oh my goodness. Paul's bill would require individual royalty amounts to be disclosed. The legislation would also require that members of federal advisory committees that make public health recommendations produce financial disclosures. With the approval of the COVID mandates and COVID vaccine mandates, the committees approving these, we had the question, well, are these people on these committees who get royalties from the companies that manufacture the vaccine? Paul tells Reason. When I asked Anthony Fauci about this a year ago, his angry response was that it was none of our business and that he didn't have to tell us. Well, you're going to have to tell us soon, Fauci, you corrupt something or other. And let's remember this article here as well. Fauci nearly doubled his net worth during the pandemic. What? He made millions of dollars. So, of course, he doesn't want us checking those royalties, does he? Because he knows he's corrupt. And, it's amazing how little people will sell the country for, sell their souls for a few $1,000,000 to ruin the livelihoods of millions of Americans. That's just not okay. So Fauci's household net worth increased by $5 million between 2019 and 2021. And let's remember, he told us that there would be a pandemic before the pandemic happened. I thought that's just nuts. But anyways, next up is possibly the most corrupt part of all of this. It says government scientists got $325 million in royalties from China, Russia, pharma firms. Wow. And let's remember, we've had a lot of business our government has in places like China and Ukraine and so on. A lot of labs. It says here the National Institutes of Health scientists raked in more than $325 million in royalties from Chinese and Russian entities as well as pharmaceutical companies over more than a decade, according to a new report. NIH Director Dr. Francis Collins and former National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases Director Dr. Anthony Corrupt Old Man Fauci were among the thousands of government whitecoats who took the cash between September 2009 and October 2020. You are corrupt, Mr. Anthony Fauci. Several of those royalties came from companies that in turn received federal contracts and grants, prompting concerns about conflicts of interest. Okay, we're more than a little concerned at this point. Collins, for instance, took licensing payments from at least 4 firms that have been awarded nearly $50 million from the U.S. government since 2008. Whew, corruption. As the most recognized official at NIH, Dr. Anthony Fauci was the face of the third-party royalties controversy. But our investigation was about a lot more than any single scientist. From openthebooks.com. I haven't been there yet, but I need to go. Founder and CEO Adam Andrzejewski said in a statement, sorry if I completely messed up that name, quote, it was about allowing for scrutiny of these records for potential conflicts of interest, public health implications, and even national security implications for all of us. Every American should understand the stakes in play when public health guidance is released by the federal government. Sounds like there's a lot more things that need looking into besides just the COVID vaccine and origins. Fauci has said he donates all his royalties to charity, except your Fauci. Come on, man. Your net worth doubled during coronavirus. Clearly, you're getting money from somewhere and not just giving it all to charity. The NIH permits inventors to take up to $2,000 in their first collection from a licensee, up to 15% for royalties between $2,000 and $50,000, and up to 25% for royalties above $50,000. They may not receive more than $150,000 annually from royalties. Unredacted documents obtained by the group through the Freedom of Information Act show at least 34 Chinese companies are licensing NIH technologies initially funded by taxpayers. What? Why are we funding? Why are U.S. taxpayers funding Chinese creations? That's just ludicrous. Some of those for the Chinese government, by the way, as well, because I mean, China is one big Enron. There isn't really a big separation between the government and companies. Some of those licensing fees came from the Wuhan Institute. Oh, we've heard that one before. Of biological products, a subsidiary of the Chinese government owned pharmaceutical company. Like I just said, Chinese government owned pharmaceutical company. No, there's no separation. This is the Chinese government. Sinopharm, which produced a COVID-19 vaccine. Of course they did. The pandemic that we all, suffered from. They all knew was happening, apparently. I mean, we'll watch a video in another video where Fauci talks about predicting the pandemic before it happened. In 2016, the biological products company moved its headquarters next to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, where gain of function research funded by the US government may have led to the outbreak of the pandemic. At least we can write this in post now. At least you can put it on social media, right? It's about time, although there's still some chance you might get yourself in trouble. The late Dr. Robert Chinock, the former head of the NIAID's Laboratory of Infectious Diseases, and Dr. Jeffrey Cohen, his successor, were just a few of the virologists on the take from the Wuhan-based company. Yeah. A Russian animal vaccine producer reported to be a front for Soviet-era bioweapons research also made several payments to two scientists from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Are these people pro-America? Do they care about this country? Why are they allying with these people in China and Russia? Our historical, let's just say competitors, enemies. Other third-party payments from firms in at least 31 countries included a bunch of other places. Royalties also came from U.S.-based Purdue Pharmaceuticals. Senator Rand Paul, this is our guy right here, who recently referred Fauci to the Department of Justice for having allegedly lied to Congress about government funding of Chinese labs, recently asked the Senate to mandate royalty disclosures from federal employees, but was shot down in committee by Democrats. And Senator Lisa Murkowski. Come on, Murkowski. What are you doing? Some employees and the federal government are receiving royalties paid out by companies, including pharmaceutical manufacturers, who often have business before the agencies that oversee them, he said in a July Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee hearing. Without this amendment, taxpayers and Congress itself are left in the dark when trying to assess conflicts of interest. And I think we've just identified a few of them, or at least the New York Post has. So if you enjoy this type of content, please like and subscribe. I appreciate it. The more people that subscribe, the more content we'll produce. Have a great day.